Hello, good tidings to all. I hope everything is good with you. Today we're just going to talk about, again, some of the contradictions. I'm not going to be making too many more videos like this, but I want to be comprehensive in my takedown of Christianity as a literal faith. So we're going to go through contradictions in geography now, through the four Gospels, and again show how these eyewitness accounts are anything but. It looks a lot more like they are written from afar with a lack of geographic understanding, or they were originally just written as stories that didn't require any historical validation because they were storytelling. That's it. So yes, introduction now. When four biographies of a single figure disagree about where he lived, travelled, preached and died, the historian must pause. Yeah, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, are not merely varied in detail, they contradict each other on geography so fundamentally that their collective historical reliability becomes doubtful. If the authors or late editors could not even align the map of Jesus' life, it raises profound questions about whether these texts were written from eyewitness memory or from evolving theological imagination. Okay, contradictions in birth and childhood geography, ancestral home. Now we have commented on this part before a little bit, but we're going to do it just anyway as well to consolidate the geographical problems. Ancestral home. Matthew begins with the family living in Bethlehem, Matthew 2:1, only later moving to Nazareth after returning from Egypt, Matthew 2:22-23. Luke, by contrast, starts with them in Nazareth, Luke 1:26, travelling only to Bethlehem for the census, Luke 2:4-5, and returning directly home afterwards, Luke 2:39. These are opposite directions. Flight to Egypt. Matthew uniquely includes a flight to Egypt, a big deal in these accounts. Matthew 2:15, absent in Luke, whose family never leaves Judea. Chronological contradictions. Now, Matthew's Herod the Great in 4 BCE versus Luke's Quirinius census 6 CE cannot coincide historically either, right? 10 years out. A summary. Matthew's roots the family in Judea and constructs a south to north migration. Luke roots them in Galilee and makes Bethlehem a temporary detour. One makes Jesus a Judean child, the other a Galilean. Both craft geography to match prophecy. Okay, so Micah 5:2, Bethlehem, and Hosea 11:1, out of Egypt, not historical travel routes. And again, this resonance with the Old Testament. Okay. Divergent beginnings of ministry, location of John's baptism. Matthew places John in the wilderness of Judea, Matthew 3:1. Mark at the Jordan River without specification. Mark 1:4-5. Luke in the region about the Jordan, Luke 3:3. And John Bethany beyond the Jordan, John 1:28. Possibly east of the river. These cannot all describe the same place. Post-baptism sequence. In the synoptics, Jesus immediately enters the wilderness for 40 days. Matthew 4:1, Mark 4:12, Luke 4:1. In John, he goes the next day to Galilee. John 1:43. One version has fasting and solitude in the desert. The other has social ministry, right? So some of these are smaller contradictions, some are gaping, are huge. This would be a slightly smaller one, but again, they're wrong with each other. Commencement of ministry. The synoptics say Jesus begins preaching in Galilee after John's imprisonment, Matthew 4:12, Mark 4:14-15. John says Jesus preaches in Judea while John is still active, John 3:22 and 4:1. Travel through Samaria now. Matthew and Mark never mention it. Luke has him rejected by a Samaritan village. Luke 9:52 and 53. John has him welcomed and preaching there. John 4. The same region yields opposite reactions and theological roles. Number 3 now. Galilean geography and local discrepancies. Nazareth. All synoptics call it Nazareth of Galilee. Matthew 2:23. Mark 1:9. And yet there is no archaeological or textual evidence of Nazareth settlement in the early 1st century. Big problem. Books have been written on this. 1:4:6, even John 1:4:6 even mocks it, calling could anything good come out of Nazareth, suggesting obscurity or non-existence. And John's gospel is different from the synoptics. Gerasene, Gadara, Gerasea confusion. Yes. Mark 5:1 and Luke 8:26 set the exorcism in the region of Gerasene, while Matthew 8:28 places it among the Gadareans. Gerasa lies about 30 miles from the Sea of Galilee, Gadara about 6 miles. Only Gedesa, a later correction by origin, lies on the lake's shore. These name drifts betray geographical ignorance now. Okay, Bethsaida and Capernaum versus Capernaum. John 1:44 calls Philip, Andrew and Peter men of Bethsaida. Mark 1:21-29 places their home in Capernaum. The two towns are distinct. Sea of Galilee versus the Sea of Tiberias. Matthew, Mark and Luke call it the Sea of Galilee, but John 6:1 calls it the Sea of Tiberias, a later Roman name anachronistic for Jesus' time. Why would he make this mistake? It's a Roman name now, and that's later. When are these Gospels written? Okay, number 4, Jerusalem journeys and ministry timetable. Number of visits. The synoptics depict only one journey to Jerusalem, culminating in Jesus' death. John portrays at least 3 Passovers. John 2:13, 6, 4 and 11:55, implying a multi-year ministry. Cleansing of the temple occurs near the end of the story in the synoptics, Matthew 21, Mark 11 and Luke 19, but near the beginning in John 2:13 and to 22. Home region of ministry. The synoptics confine Jesus largely to Galilee, while John centers him in Jerusalem and Judea, alternating back and forth. Contradictions in the final journey and passion geography. Route to Jerusalem. Matthew 19:1 and Mark 10:1 have Jesus leaving Galilee and entering Judea beyond the Jordan. Luke 9:51 and 17:11 traces a long route through Samaria and Pereira. John 11:54 and 12:1 show him already near Bethany, close to Jerusalem. These cannot be harmonized. Blind man of Jericho. Matthew 20:29 and Mark 10:46 describe the healing as he left Jericho. Luke 18:35 says as he approached Jericho, the same miracle, opposite direction, of course. So a smaller contradiction, but a contradiction nonetheless. Last Supper. The synoptics identify it as a Passover meal. Matthew 26:17 and 19 to 19. Mark 14:12-16. Luke 22:7-13. John moves it a day earlier to Jesus. So Jesus dies as the Passover lambs are slain. John 19:14. So again, a one day out here. Not the massivist biggest problem, but still a contradiction, and it caused a huge controversy in shortly after these times. People were trying to figure out what was going on 200-300 years later. Trial sequences. Matthew and Mark had a night trial before the Sanhedrin. Matthew 26:57, Mark 14:53. Luke moves it to daylight. Luke 22:66. John omits it, describing instead interrogations before Annas and Caiaphas. John 18:13-28. Carrying the cross, Simon of Cyrene bears it in the synoptics, Matthew 27:32, Mark 15:21, Luke 23:26, and John 19:17 says Jesus carried it himself. Crucifixion site, Matthew, Mark, and John call it Golgotha. Luke names it the skull, Luke 23:3. The exact location remains uncertain. And Golgotha means skull, so again this is a small subtle one, but it's still there. Resurrection, geography and chronology. Location of appearances, Matthew 28:7, 10, 16, and Mark 16:7 direct the disciples to Galilee. Luke 24:33-49 and John 20:21 present appearances in Jerusalem. Different places entirely. With John later adding a scene in Galilee. Either the risen Jesus appeared in the north or the south, but not both. First, timing of events. Luke 24:50-51 compressed the resurrection and ascension into the same day. John 20:26 separates appearances by 8 days. Acts 1:3 extends it to 40 days. You can't make it up. You can make it up, but you can't make this up. But you have to have made it up. Okay, ascension site. Luke 24:50-51 places is in Bethany. Matthew and Mark mention none. John implies Galilee. These differences cannot be described as the same history. Confusion, geography as the measure of credibility. Geography is the most objective test of a narrative. Cities either exist or they do not. Roads either connect or they do not. When four Gospels disagree on the home of their celestial figure, or central figure, the sequence of his travel, the region of his ministry, and even the site of his resurrection, their historical foundation collapses under its own weight. The evangelist wrote not as cartographers or chronicles, but as theologians, shaping sacred drama rather than recording memory. Their maps cannot be overlaid. Their itineraries clash, from Bethany versus Nazareth to Galilee versus Judea, to the Last Supper and resurrection, divided between Jerusalem and Galilee. The geographical contradictions are pervasive and irreconcilable. Faith may live on symbols, but history cannot. Geography tells us plainly these are not coordinates of a life, but contours of belief. And remember these four writers. I'm going to do a quick follow-up, I think, at some point, but I want to know exactly how much time the two apostles and the two commentators on the, Luke and Mark actually had in time with each other to try and get, if there is any evidence of that. I'm gonna just remind myself in a little follow-up video, because it's so important to know that this is not the kind of stuff that eyewitnesses to an event happening over there in the distance might, of course, make subtle mistakes on describing an event like a robbery or something like that. But in this kind of gaping, contradictive problem making, these are not reconcilable with one another. These people would have had substantial time with one another. Matthew and John were both disciples. They contradict in fundamental ways. Who had dementia here? Who and why were they not corrected within their times by people who might have heard them say other things, like the history? Maybe John was very old when he wrote. According to Christians, I think he self-evidently must have been, but he seems to be dementia-ridden. That is, of course, one way to explain it away. but it doesn't really, John doesn't read like that. It's actually quite a beautiful, in some ways, gospel. I want to read something before I go, and this is from Origin. It's a commentary on John 10:4. Scripture contains many contradictions and many statements which are not literally true, but must be read spiritually and mystically. I'll read you again the Principius, sorry, I don't know, I'm getting slower with old age. 4:2-9. God placed the scripture containing stumbling blocks and impossibilities that we may not be drawn away from the mere letter, but learn this to seek the meaning behind, which is hidden, beneath. So we've already been through I'm going to leave it there, really. Just wanted to say, in even geographical terms, there are humongous problems with trying to frame this as a history with four guys who we must assume are of sound mind, getting things so fundamentally incorrect. One ministry to three completely different birth narratives. The resurrection stories in 5 different accounts, being different 5 times. I'll leave that there. Peace.